What I'm making right now is a pie crust. This is plain pastry pie crust. This will be the prepared crust for the cream pie. This happens to be a two-crust pie dough recipe. So, sometimes when you're just beginning, you're making pies, it's easier to work with two crusts, enough to make two crusts than it is for only one. So that'll be okay. It calls for 1.5 cups of flour. I have the flour measured in there already, and a 1/2 cup of shortening, of fat. This is one of the parts of the recipe that some people use oil. I never have liked an oil pie crust. Some people use Crisco. I still like, and I'm using lard. That's from pork, but from pigs. So it takes a 1/2 cup of fat. And a pie crust is basically flour, fat, salt, and water. Not a lot to it. You may find some recipes that call for some other things, but this is a pretty simple, basic pie recipe. So we'll get these in here, and it calls for a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Now, you don't add the water yet. And what I'm going to do with this is take pastry blender. If you don't have these at home, you can use a couple of knives. Do not use your hands. One of the things you don't want is to melt this fat. The fat is soft, but you don't want it to melt. And our body, the heat from our bodies is enough to melt that fat. And the whole idea behind this is to cut this flour and cut the shortening into the flour. That way, every little piece of shortening will be coated by the flour, and this is what makes a flaky pie crust. If we use our hands, it melts it and it's not coated, and your pie crusts don't turn out as flaky as they should. When you bake a pie crust, it should have little blisters all over it, which shows that it's nice and coated and flaky. And you'll work this, and I work it a lot, to get all these pieces small enough, and they need to be uniform size and coated. So some people are very good using knives. I'm not. I like my pastry blender. I use this thing for a lot of stuff, but and I'm sure our great-great-great-grandmothers used knives instead of a pastry blender, but this works for me. Now, some people will use a food processor. I don't particularly care for that. I think it mixes it up too much, but and if you can see that, it's in pieces. Now I don't want to use my hands because I don't want it to get too warm. But it's very coarse. There. Okay, that's a good picture. It's very coarse, and all of these pieces of fat are coated in flour, which is what you want. So this will make the pie crust nice and flaky. And I did forget my fork. I need a fork. Now the next step to this is to take cold water. And I have very, very cold water. I put ice cubes in it because I want it really cold. And it's going to take 4 to 5 tablespoons. If it's really humid out, it doesn't take as much water. If it's very dry, like in wintertime, it takes more water. And this is something that you learn along the way. It's not anything written in stone. You never know exactly how much water it's going to take. Too much handling will make this pie tough. Too much water will make it tough. Too much flour will make it tough. Not enough water will make it tough. So like I said, it's a very, you have to work with it and practice and learn about it. So, and I'm just going to sprinkle this around the top. That's 2. What I usually do is do 4 tablespoons and check to see how it's doing. I want to give this a little toss. I use just a regular table fork and just give it a toss. Now I'm not stirring it, I'm tossing it. I want to see how it's going to hold together. That's why I don't want to get my hands in there, because instead of holding together, it will melt together, and that's not what you want to do. Okay, so I need more. So that would be 4 tablespoons. And you want this to form a ball eventually. Now I'm not stirring. It's not a stirring motion. It's basically tossing to try to coat everything with water, with the moisture. And I have a lot of dry here, so I'm going to add some more water. Just sprinkle it around. And it's starting to look like it should. It's starting, you want all the extra dry around the bottom and underneath to start coming together. And I can press it down. I'm pressing with my fork right now to see if I can make it form a ball. And I think I need just a little, not a lot, just a little. Because you don't want this soupy at all. This is not to be soupy, not sticky. Okay, that's coming together nicely. So I'm going to press it into a ball. Now this will be the one time you're going to handle it, and this is to press it into a ball. So the heat from your hands will, here, and you can see it's almost completely together. The heat from your hands will make it come together and form a ball, which is what you want. And you pick up any loose, any extra. Now, after you get this done, and I have all these pieces, just kind of press it into a ball. Not a lot of work. Now I'm not kneading or anything. Too much work with your hands will make it tough. I'm going to let it sit in the bowl for about 10 minutes. It's called hydrating, so that all that water is absorbed, the moisture is absorbed by the flour, and then it will roll out much easier. I have turned my oven on to 475 degrees. It's preheating, so because this is going to be a baked pie crust. What I'm doing right now is taking my pie dough, splitting it in half. And you just pull it apart. And I'm going to set this other half back. And so I have half of a ball, half of that ball. The other thing you have to do is you have to, and I washed this really good before I started doing this. I washed it and dried it. And make sure you do that at school, because we use these kitchens a lot, and I don't want any dirt or germs or whatever. So make sure your countertops are really, really clean. And I'm sprinkling flour on this counter and spreading it around. Now, too much, like I said before, too much flour will make this tough, and you don't want this to be tough. The other thing you need to do is get enough flour on the rolling pin. Usually I use a stockinette, a sock that goes on this, and I can roll it in flour and coat it, but since you don't have those in your kitchens, I'm not going to use that right now. So I want this to be a nice ball, and I'm flattening it down to keep it a nice round shape. And like I said, it hydrated. You're going to have to be lifting this and moving it every so often because you don't want it to stick to your countertop. When you roll from the center and lift at the edge. Middle, lift from the edge. And roll side, lift. Roll side, lift. The reason you lift at the edge is if you keep rolling flat, you're going to have it really almost too thin at the side edges and not thin enough in the middle. So I roll and lift, roll and lift. And it's just a matter of working this. And you want to roll it in all directions and lift it. And if you don't have enough flour on your rolling pin, you get more flour. Now, at this point, I want to lift it because it's sticking a little bit, so I need to get a little more flour under this. I don't want to tear it. And I'm lifting, and then I can put some more flour down. Not a lot. You can see I don't, and this is where it's like the fat is stuck to the counter. And so now I flipped it over. I have more flour on my rolling pin, a little bit, and I can lift and roll. And always just add a little more, not a lot. And you try to keep this as nice a circle as you possibly can. And I am pressing, I'm not. And I want to check to make sure it's not going to stick. And this is pretty delicate, and you don't want it to tear. So I'm going to just put a little more flour underneath. Lift it over here. Please don't tear, because then we have to do some repairing, and I don't want you to have to repair. But we don't want to handle it too much. That's the other part of this. Too much handling makes it tough. Too much flour makes it tough. Too much water makes it tough. So we want it big enough to fit in our pie plate and also up the sides. And the only way you're going to know this is to take your pie plate and set it on there to see if it's big enough. I need a little bit bigger. I have a little indentation here, so I have to allow for that. Okay, now this is where it gets a little interesting. You're going to lift this very carefully off your counter and fold it in half. Please don't be in a hurry. It will tear, it will stretch, and we don't want it to stretch, we don't want it to tear. And then, so we have it folded in half, and then we're going to fold it in half again. So basically you're folding it into fours. And it's very thin, it's a very delicate thing. And we will put it gently in the pie plate, unfold it, and then unfold it the other direction. And we want to, without stretching, because this is going to bake, and when it bakes it will shrink, and we want it to be completely to the edge so it holds all of our pie filling. And I'm not stretching it, I'm just allowing it to sink down into the pie shell. Okay, now there's all kinds of extra pie dough here, and what I'm going to do, this is not a very sharp knife, is take and leave about a ½ inch overhang and just kind of press it and cut it off. And I'm not tearing it, I'm just pressing and removing that extra. The reason we don't cut right even with the edge of the pie plate is, like I said, it's going to shrink. We need to put a pretty edge on it. All nice pies have an edge of some sort. Now, if we had a tear in this, and I don't have one, the way to mend a tear is to take hot water, take a little bit of hot water in your finger, and say there was a tear right here, I would take and I would put hot water on this, lay the other side on top of it, and kind of smooth it down. So that's how, and because it's a fat, it will melt together. So we don't have to worry about that. Now, just fold a little bit under the edge, that little extra. Fold that under all the way around. And then we're going to do a little technique called fluting. And every pie maker has their own way of fluting. And I'm going to show you the one that I do. But see, I'm just folding it under. It's still over the edge a little bit. So I'm folding it under all the way around, and then I'll do a flute. It's not playing the flute, but it is, that's what they call is fluting. Okay, I'm going to start on the far side of the pie. I'm going to take my 2 fingers and my thumb in between and press against my thumb. And it makes a nice little whoop-de-doo. I don't know what else to call it. Then put your finger next to that. Can you zoom in a little more, please? There, okay. Put your finger next to that loop. And other finger, with your thumb, you push in. And you turn the pie, put your finger next to it, and leave room for a thumb in between. Finger and then thumb. And you're pinching them, is what you're doing, is you're pinching. Because you want that edge to stay together. And that extra little bit that you add to the edge just makes it a little firmer, and it will stand up better. It's not going to make it a terribly thick crust, because my pie crust is very thin. It's almost paper thin, not quite, just a little bit thicker than that. So you can see that. I'm pressing and pressing and pressing and pressing. All the way around. Oven is ready. Okay, so this is what it looks like. It's all fluted. Before you can put it in the oven, though, you have to take a fork and you're going to put holes in it. It's called prick the pie crust. And you do it up the sides, because if you don't do this, it's going to have air bubbles, and this lets the air escape from underneath and keeps it nice and flat. Otherwise, it would be all bumpy and there would be no room for your filling. Okay, that's what the pie crust looks like. You can see those fork prints in there. I'm going to put it in the oven for 8 to 10 minutes. It should be nice and golden brown, and then we'll be ready for filling. I checked my pie and it is ready to go. It's golden brown, but now I've got to tell you, it's pulled away from the edges, so I must have stretched it just a little bit. See, even I make mistakes, or I guess it's not a mistake, but it's not exactly as perfect as I would like it to be. But this is what it looks like. It didn't shrink down in, but I see it is pulled away from the edges. The other thing I want to talk to you about is cleaning your rolling pin. When you have a rolling pin, do not put this in water. You need to hold it above the sink with your dishcloth. You need to clean it off. Don't get me wrong, you have to clean it off. But you hold it above the sink. Don't stick it in water because there's bearings inside of that and you don't want water on the inside. And you need to get all that dough and flour and lard and shortening and all of that off of there and make sure it's clean, but don't put it in water. So you're going to wash it, rinse it off. You need hot water because it's I'm going to fat on it. Rinse it off and then dry it with a towel. And make sure you get the ends. And then take your dish towel and dry it. But please, please, please don't ever put these in water. And get them nice and clean. And they'll last you a long time. My oven's yelling at me. Okay. I also use the extra pie dough. I'm going to make another kind of pie. But this one is not going to be a pre-baked shell. This one I'm going to put a custard filling in. That's for another time, but I use the extra pie dough that I had to make that custard filling.